Is Tetairoa McMillan already wide receiver one here in Carolina? And can Mitchell Evans be a day one starter? We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, and over on Blue Sky also at Julian Council. Because on Fridays, I'm here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. And the way to get those questions into me is by either adding me or DMing me over on Twitter at Julian Council, or adding me over on Blue Sky also, again, at Julian Council. This episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. We've gotten to know 6 out of the 8 Panther draft picks from last month's 2025 NFL draft. Let's figure out what's going on with the final 2 guys, and Tet McMillan and Mitchell Evans on today's show. Got Damon Fairall, who's going to break down Tetairoa McMillan for us, and then Tyler Wojciak from Locked On Irish going to talk about Mitchell Evans and how he fits in here to Carolina as well later on the show. Let's start off, though, with the number 1 overall pick there for Carolina, or the first pick there for Carolina. He went 8th overall, surprised many of us when they took Tet McMillan. We'll talk to Damon Fairall, who covers Arizona Wildcats, about Tet right now on Locked On Panthers. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers, and as promised, Damon Fairall. He is the host of AZ Wildcats, breaking down the Arizona Wildcats. Follow him over on Twitter at Damon Dawg, D-A-W-G. Damon, glad to have you on the show today, man, to break down the Panthers' first-round pick and another guy who was a dog there in Tucson, Tetairoa McMillan. How you doing?
Doing good, man. Thank you, Julian, for having me on, and just happy to talk some T-Mac, man. It's one of my favorite things to do. Just got done with my podcast recording it and was doing the same thing about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, and I imagine like the last 3 years, and especially the last 2, that's all you guys have been talking about is Tet McMillan and what he was able to do in that offense. And Noah Fafita was an awesome story 2 years ago when they went on the scene. And I think won 11 games that year. Was it 10 with Jedd Fisch his final year before he took off to UW? But even last season, it continued with Fafita and McMillan put up those big numbers, those old high school friends back from California. I mean, when the Panthers took him, I was surprised because I didn't expect that Tet McMillan to be the top player on their board. I thought they were going defense, but once it happened, I looked at it as, well, damn, I mean, they got clearly the best wide receiver in the draft. And if you compare him to the guys who went last year, like Rome Odunze and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, his numbers are right there with them, if not better. So how do you compare him to some of the guys that were taken a year ago? Because I don't think anybody in this draft class is comparable to the talent that Tet McMillan has.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that last point. I don't think Matthew Golden or Emeka Egbuka are anywhere close to the level of talent that T-Mac is and was in college. Regarding last year's class, I think that, obviously Marv was that upper echelon, can't miss prospect that, sometimes rolls around every now and again, like a generational type wide receiver. And so I think it's hard to say that he was Marv's level as a prospect, but I also think that out of those 3, he plays most alike Marv. Stylistically, I think that, he's in the mold of that like kind of physical specimen type of wide receiver that, and while I think the yards after catch especially, but, even the route running is somewhat underrated just because of that size and how much of physical freaks they are. But mostly they just catch everything, right? That's what they're known for. But I do think that he was kind of more in that Malik Neighbors area because I think that he was better than Rome Odunze in college. Rome Odunze was a phenomenal receiver at Washington, played with a lot of really good wide receivers, as well, in Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan, who's now on the Bucks. And, Michael Penix was throwing him the football. So their offense was prolific, right? Like there's a lot of mouths to feed, but, you can only cover so many people at one time. I thought Rome Odunze was really good. You look at his stats, they're comparable to what T-Mac put up. at Arizona in 2023, but I just think that the way in which they did so is a little bit different. You're looking at a first-round quarterback versus a good college quarterback in Noah Fafita. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think I would put him kind of a similar caliber to Malik Neighbors, stylistically more like Marvin, and I think he's better than Roman Dunze.
Yeah, and you also have to look too, especially this past season. I mean, Arizona's offense was not necessarily what it was the year prior, and just the team with the coaching change was not what I think a lot of people were hoping was going to be built off of that season back in 2023. And constantly, it felt like it was an effort, Tet's down there somewhere, kind of situation with the offense where he kept putting up big numbers week in and week out. And like, what does that tell you kind of about his work ethic and the kind of player that he is, that he was still able to maintain those numbers? I think even improve upon them this past season, even with all the change and everyone knowing like that is the offense down there at Arizona.
Yeah, for some context for people that may not be locked in on Arizona football, the second leading receiver for Arizona last year was a former walk-on in the form of Chris Hunter with 323 yards in 12 football games. It was essentially a one-man show. A running back with 245 yards was the third leading receiver on the team. So when you say it's a one-man show, that's putting it lightly. He was the single target out there basically at from a receiving standpoint. In years past, that was not the case. Jacob Cowing, who's on the 49ers now, Tanner McLaughlin, who was, I believe, a 7th-round pick to the Bengals as well, was on the 23 roster. And you really saw, he wasn't the focal point or the one, weapon that you could do anything on the field in 2023. And he was still almost just as effective, just a little bit more efficient. Right. And the efficiency takes a step back last year, but I think the context provided is that it had to, because that was the only way they could move the football ever, basically. So, yeah, I mean, I think, he deserves a little bit of slack for how last season went. And statistically, you're right. It's right up there, and it's elite of the elite. And I think that shows what a great player he is. But he had a lot working against him last year. A putrid offensive scheme, a step back from Noah Fafita. It was tough, and he still managed to put up 1,300 yards. Still managed to get 8 touchdowns. Still managed to be first team All-American. So it's I think. Really, mostly it shows that about his personality, in my opinion. And this goes into when Jed Fish left Arizona for Washington and that coaching change was made, everyone thought Tetairoa McMillan was going to be out the door, whether that was following Jed Fish to Washington or, it's been reported that Alabama came offering. I believe Noah Fafita's dad said that Alabama offered both him and T-Mac to come over last season. And they decided to, and I'm not to say that they didn't get paid, because they did. There was a conscious effort to keep them in Tucson, but they were guys that, they took less money than what they could have gotten, and they took a step back in terms of, the upper echelon of college football, which they could have gone and played. And it just goes to show, I think, the type of character that they are. Noah Fafita, in a documentary describing the situation, he said that T-Mac was the first guy after Jed Fish's exit meeting who said, so how are we going to get everybody to stay? That was his first reaction. And Noah Fafita was like, I thought we were going to Washington, to be honest with you. And T-Mac was the first guy who was trying to galvanize the roster and keep it together because he loved the place that he was at. And I just think he's, I can't say enough good things about him, the person.
Yeah. And look, I understand nowadays that people are trying to make money, and by all means, go and get your bread. But there's still something about, loyalty, whatever it is. There's still something about just stand where you're at. And if you're happy there, even if things have changed, just not leaving for the sake of change, which I feel like is a lot of guys nowadays and some short-sighted thoughts. And with T-Mac, like, he was going to be a top dude regardless, whether he went to follow there at Arizona. If he went and caught passes from Jalen Milroe last year at Bama, he was probably going to be in his position no matter what. So why leave if you're happy? And I think about Zay Flowers at Boston College, had plenty of opportunities where he could have left, and he didn't have like his best friend from high school as his quarterback. He could have left and gone taking money. He said, no, I'm good. And he still balled out at BC, got drafted in the first round, is now balling out with Baltimore. Like, it doesn't have to be trading places every single year. So that really, I mean, for at least for personally, I like that to hear that that's what McMillan really, and that he was the first guy, because I know that both of those guys, Fafita and McMillan, said, "Now we're staying," but for him to be the guy is like, "Now let's not go anywhere." I do like that. Now, I mean, there are obviously throughout the draft process to me people who are going to bring up some of the bad things about prospects, and to me, it just kind of feels like the well is kind of poisoned on Tet for whatever reason as things played out after the season was over. I don't really know why, but there was questions about, his speed. Could he be able to truly get open? And then there was a video that circulated from, I guess, when he was a freshman in college, saying he doesn't like to watch film or watch football at all, which I was actually unaware of until draft night. I was doing like a hit with the network, and the person asked me, "Hey, what do you think about that?" It's like, I don't know what that is. And I went and found it on Yahoo, and they offered no context. I played it on the show. Some people were like, "Hey, man, that's actually from a couple years ago." I was like, "Oh, well, good to know," because I wouldn't expect for Dave Canales and Dan Morgan to use the 8th overall pick on a guy who they did not believe was going to come in and like work hard. And I also showed a video of Canales right after I played that one, talking about how much of a worker they believe Tet McMillan is. So of the criticism out there, are they fair, or is there any sort of context that we need in them? I'm just curious how you see all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I view him as a guy that, basically no one that has been around him has anything bad to say about. And so I think that comes with work ethic. I was down at the spring showcase, which has replaced the spring game, and was talking to a couple of his former teammates. And they were talking about being in the weight room with him. And they said that, they were basically going one-on-one with each other to see who could lift the most. Like T-Mac was involved in at the forefront of, these weight room workout type of, competitions. And so to me, that doesn't strike me as a guy who doesn't like to, put in the effort. And regarding that video that, went viral, I do think that it's because the well was dry, as you say. I do think that it's because he's such a good prospect. And I think that they got to find some things that are cons, I guess, for a prospect. Every year. But that video in particular, to my understanding, it was taken when he was 19 years old. I believe he just finished his freshman year. I've actually eaten in this place. It's called Bear Down Kitchen. It's where the football team eats after practices. And, I think that I don't even know if he knew he was being recorded in that moment. He certainly didn't know it would be, sent out on the internet 3 years down the line, in regards to, trying to, degrade his draft stock. So I don't put much stock into it. He also didn't say he doesn't watch film. He said he didn't like to watch film, I believe, which are two entirely different things. He who likes doing homework, you know what I mean? Like no one is thrilled, pumped up to do homework, right? And maybe you want that in your quarterback, but you're not always going to get that out of your skill position players, right? Like I don't take too much stock into it. I don't think it's concerning. And I think that his play on the field and his character off of it speaks for itself enough where, you can talk yourself into that guy all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think that this organization, the guys who are leading it now, are going to invest this much, which it is an investment on a guy who they don't believe is going to come in and do the work. Want to get you out on this. I was talking about it last week. Somebody asked me what are fair expectations for him, and I compare that to the receivers from last year, like we mentioned earlier, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and also in Malik Neighbors, because those guys were top 10 guys. Everybody else in this draft class was drafted later on. So nobody else is a top 10 prospect. And I look at the seasons that Rome had, that Marvin had, and that Malik had, and I feel like 60 receptions, 850 yards, 6 touchdowns. That feels like fair to me. What do you think are fair expectations for a guy who's coming in as a top 10 pick in a situation where I think he can become the wide receiver 1?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you look at what Marvin did last year. I think Marvin had a somewhat underrated season because it was not as loud as people expected it to be. He put up 885 yards and 8 touchdowns. I think that's probably where I would put maybe the floor of a T-Mac, or just because I feel like he has more road to target share than maybe a Marvin Harrison Jr. did, given the fact that Trey McBride burst on the scene as like the number 1 receiving tight end outside of Brock Bowers in football last year, right? So, I look at the Panthers and I say, there's Adam Thielen, who, had a good season last year, underrated season. And, you look at some of the other receivers that you guys have, Xavier Legette, who you invested in and whatnot. There's mouths to feed, but I do think that he's that number 1 guy from the jump. And so I kind of expect him to put up a similar season to Marv, that 900 range, that kind of 8 to 10 touchdown range, because he's such a good red zone threat. And yeah, I expect him to have a really strong rookie season. Maybe not Malik Neighbors level, but you know, a step back from that.
Yeah, and the situation's always important to look at because Adunze, he had DJ Moore and Keenan Allen in there. Like, they're not asking him to be the guy. Malik Neighbors, it was Darius Slayton, I think Wandale Robinson. Like, they needed him to be the guy. And then, like, I don't think anyone, like you mentioned, saw Trey McBride having that kind of a season. But every other receiver out there in the desert, like, I love Greg Dortch for what he did at Wake Forest, but come on, like, let's be honest here. Who was the top receiver, wide receiver in that room is going to be Marvin immediately. Totally. And I think there's an opportunity for Tet to be that number one guy in Carolina. But Damon, really appreciate your time. Check him out, guys, again on AZ Wildcats, breaking down the University of Arizona. A bunch going on football-wise. Obviously, a great basketball program to have down there as well. Shout out to my guy, Caleb Love. We'll always appreciate him for retiring Coach K when he's a Tar Heel. But check him out on X at Damon Dog and all the work that he does over on YouTube and where we listen to your favorite podcast. Damon, again, appreciate your time on the show today, man.
Really appreciate you, Julian, and bear down.
Absolutely. Take a quick pause and come back, and we'll look at Mitchell Evans and what he's bringing here to Carolina here in 2025. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers, and as promised, the host of Locked On Irish, Tyler Wojciak, joining me now to break down Mitchell Evans, the Panthers' fifth-round pick from Notre Dame. Check out Tyler over on X at Tyler Wojciak. So I'm going to spell it for you, Wojciak. It's right there for all the YouTube viewers as well. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tyler, how you doing, man?
I'm doing all right, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And glad to have you on here to talk about Mitchell Evans, who I see as the quintessential Notre Dame tight end. I've loved what Tommy Trimble's been able to do here in his 4 seasons in Carolina. I like that they re-signed him this offseason. But when I think about Notre Dame tight ends, I think about Kyle Rudolph. I think about Tyler Eifert. I think about those type of guys who are pass-catching tight ends who are major parts of that offense, and that's what Mitchell Evans was in South Bend. Is there any past Notre Dame tight end that you compare him to?
I would say John Carlson, but that's not a name that most people would remember. You got to go back to like the Brady Quinn days to find him and when he played. He did have an NFL career as well, but I think your point about Eifert and Rudolph is a good one because they were more receiving tight ends, and I think that Mitchell Evans is definitely a better pass catcher than Tommy Tremble. Like when Tommy Tremble was in college, he would just annihilate people as a blocker, and they would bring him in, they would run him in motion, and it was so entertaining to watch because at the time, they also had a freshman named Michael Mayer who turned out to be the most decorated tight end in Notre Dame history. And Mitchell Evans actually sat behind Mayer for 2 years, and really all he did was block. Mayer was catching all the passes, and Notre Dame did not have basically any receivers at the time. So when it was finally Mitchell Evans' turn to really take over that tight end one role, I didn't really know what to expect. And then in 2023, he had a pretty slow start to the year, and then all of a sudden, it's late September. Notre Dame's playing Ohio State in 2023, so Sam Hartman was the quarterback. Mitchell Evans just went off. He had 8 catches, nearly 100 yards, making one-handed grabs on a field that was loaded with NFL players. Yeah. Mitchell Evans looked like the best guy on the field. It took me by surprise because he was not nearly as dominant up until that point. And then he really started to take off from there in 2023 before he ended up tearing his ACL in late October, which is really unfortunate for him. I think it stunted his development in his senior season. But I've seen it. There's a really, really good tight end in there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that he was behind Michael Mayer for those first couple of seasons, and he was primarily a blocker. So do you think that he's a fully ready-to-go tight end? He's not just a pass-catching tight end, but he's like a fully formed guy who can play all 3 downs?
Absolutely. They can play him in line. They could put him in the slot, and he's just a huge guy. Like he's 6'5", 250 pounds. He's got long arms, and he's certainly not afraid to block. Like he took that role in stride, and he was that tight end 2 for a couple years, and all he did was block, and he was a good blocker as well. So he has that in him. But then when he finally had the chance to be tight end 1, he got to showcase what he could do as a pass catcher. And he's really good. He's not as good of an athlete as some of the top tight ends on the board. Like, he's not great at getting a ton of separation, but if the ball is anywhere near him, he's going to make the play. And he was Notre Dame's get out of jail free card a lot of times this season when they weren't just using Riley Leonard as a battering ram up the middle. He would throw it to Mitchell Evans, and it didn't matter if there was a guy all over him, he would make the play. And this was even at the beginning of the season when you could tell he was just not 100% because he was still at the end phase of his rehab, but he's a very, very solid pass catcher. And then as the season went on, his game started to get better and better. And then he closed with a really solid game in the national championship. So he could do whatever you want him to do, whether it be run or catch passes.
Yeah, and let's go back through his senior season this past fall where Notre Dame went on just what was a magical run to the national title game before falling to Ohio State. And you brought up in 2023 when, receiver was obviously a big problem for you guys. Mitchell Evans, good player. We've seen plenty of pass-catching tight ends like Tyler Warren from Penn State lead their teams in receptions. But both those teams, Penn State this past season and Notre Dame in 23, had wide receiver issues. So it was always honestly impressive to see Evans do that. But this past season, once you got Bo Collins in there, we saw what guys like Jordan Faison was able to do, the dual sport player also plays lacrosse, and get to see those guys kind of step forward. What did you think of his overall role and how he fit into the offense this past season, especially as he was recovering from that torn ACL?
I think the way he handled it all was really impressive because there was a point in time in 2023 when he's going on this surge and he starts to really dominate games and he was Sam Hartman's favorite target. Like, is he going to leave after this year? That felt like a possibility, but then he tore his ACL in a game against Pittsburgh, and then at that point, his NFL draft aspirations, at least for that year, had to be tabled. So then he ends up coming back in 2024, really high expectations. Everyone expects him to sort of just pick up right where he left off, but that didn't really happen. He didn't have a catch in the season opener against Texas A&M, had a couple against Northern Illinois, and slowly started to get back into the swing of things. But then he really started to take off at the end of the year, had a touchdown against Florida State, had a touchdown against Virginia, and then USC had 5 catches, 59 yards, and one of the best touchdown catches of the year where he just ran a fade, had a defender draped all over him, just went up and got it. And then in the playoffs, had a big game against Penn State. So I'm sure for him, it was frustrating that he wasn't back to his normal self, but you never saw that on the field. And when he had a chance to make plays, when his number was called, he made them. But I think that as the season went on and him and Riley Leonard became more comfortable with each other and their timing was down and everything, then you started to see him become a lot more important part of that offense where they were really keying on him. Like third downs, they'd go to him and he would make the plays every single time. So I think that the way that he handled this year was really impressive. And also, once the season ended, he was the only player on Notre Dame who did everything at the NFL Combine. I think he had something to prove. He wanted to show the NFL scouts that even though he's coming off a grueling 16-game season, he went out there, he did every single testing, and his numbers weren't all great. Some of them were good, but then he comes back at the Notre Dame Pro Day and he improved in literally every single category. So I thought that was impressive too. Just his mindset of like, look, clearly wasn't healthy the whole season, but he had something to prove, and I think he did.
Yeah, and I like that mindset. Like, I can understand if you're someone like Marvin Harrison Jr. last year in the draft, you don't have to do anything. You're going to be a top 5 pick. So I totally get skipping out. But when you're a guy like Mitchell Evans and just anybody else, like, why not do everything and show them, like, this is what I can do? I'm not trying to hide from anything you've seen the tape. You can have every measurement. You can have all the medicals. Like, I'm going to show you I can be that guy. And it lands him in the 5th round. But I think in a spot in Carolina where he's going to have an opportunity with Tommy Trimble in there and JT Sanders heading into his second year to fit into that rotation. So overall, what are the Panthers getting in Mitchell Evans as a tight end?
I think they're getting a starting tight end for sure. I don't know if he has like Pro Bowl aspirations, but This is a guy who you're going to be able to count on specifically on third downs, and he can be used in the run game as well. So I think he's going to come in. He's going to fit right in. It's funny to think about him playing right next to Tommy Tremble because it's going to give me flashbacks to 2020 when it was Michael Mayer and Tommy Tremble just working together. Michael Mayer was a good blocker as well. Notre Dame ran a lot of 12 personnel, and they would just put those two guys on the same side, and they would maul people. I don't know if Mitchell Evans is going to be mauling like NFL outside linebackers right away, but I do think he's going to be a nice little safety net for Bryce Young, and they're going to be able to go to him early and often. And one thing about ACL injuries is I think like I don't know if you agree with me on this. Now, we've come far enough in just the world of medicine that guys were able to get back on the field a lot quicker after torn ACLs. Like a couple of decades ago, you tear your ACL, like your whole career might be over, at least in jeopardy. Yeah. Now guys are getting back on the field, which is great. But I think it's the year after, like the 1 year in between, where it's like, okay, now they're back to their old self. They're 100% now, and I think that's going to be the case with Mitchell Evans, because even though he was productive last year, it was still just not even a year removed from his torn ACL injury. So now in his rookie season, he's going to have that full year in between, and I think he's going to be much healthier. And actually, I would not be surprised if he's a better pro player than he was in college, kind of like Cole Kmet, who also had a pretty decent career at Notre Dame. He was really only a factor for about 1.5 seasons because he also got hurt. But then he went on to the NFL and got a nice little second contract there from the Bears. I could see a similar trajectory for Mitchell Evans.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Guys tearing their ACL coming back the next year, they're not the same guy. Once they have another offseason of getting stronger, trusting their knee, they're back to who they were before, especially with modern medicine. Like, you may even be better than what you were before with that ACL. So I totally agree with you there, Tyler, on that, and love the breakdown on Mitchell Evans. I was already excited about the quintessential Notre Dame tight end, and after talking to you today, all right. Like, the Panthers have had a really bad tight end room for a while now since Greg Olsen left to go to Seattle, then retired. After that, I mean, Tommy came in. I told people, guys, it's so difficult to go from not being a pass-catching tight end in college to come to the NFL and develop that trait. And that's a position and tight end where it's really hard to come to the league and to get in there and make an impact. So Tommy's been a good player for the role that he's played, but they've needed a true pass catcher and really just a total tight end. As good as JT Sanders is, he's not there yet as a blocker. Sounds like Mitchell Evans is there as well as a blocker and a pass catcher. So excited to see what he can do in Carolina. He is Tyler Wojciak. Check him out over on X at Tyler Wojciak. Check him out on Locked On Irish on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Great breakdown there, and exciting season coming up there. Quarterback competition going on there for the Irish this fall. So excited to see how things play out there for Marcus Freeman and the boys. So appreciate you coming on the show here, Tyler, and love the breakdown.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. Anytime.
Absolutely. Take a quick pause and come back here and talk about the roles that Mitchell Evans and Tetairoa McMillan can play for Carolina as rookies here in 2025. Thanks again to Damon Fairall and Tyler Wojciak for joining me on today's show to break down Tetairoa McMillan and also to break down Mitchell Evans, the tight end from Notre Dame. Starting off with Tet, I talked about this last week when I was asked on the mailbag, what are fair expectations? And the mailbag questioner was asking really about, would a Marvin Harrison Jr. type of season be adequate for Tet McMillan as a rookie? And I think that if he can put up those numbers, you absolutely take that. And I think, too, when you listen to Damon, who is there in Arizona, obviously familiar with the Cardinals as well, he sees the comparisons, and I don't compare Tet to any of the other guys that were drafted in this year's draft class. I'm looking at last year, looking at those guys in the top 10 and what they did, and he's going to be in a different situation than the one that Roma Dunze was in last year, where they already had DJ Moore, they already had Keenan Allen, and he was not going to step in and be that wide receiver one. But when you get taken 8th overall in the draft, when you look at this Panthers wide receiver core, where Adam Thielen going to be probably his final year in Carolina, maybe his last year playing football, period. Xavier Legette, there's promise there. I see him more as a wide receiver too. The opportunity to be the top dog is immediately there. And there's not a single guy on the roster who any NFL team coming out of college felt that they were worthy of a top 10 pick, except for Tetairoa McMillan. So when you're in that situation and the opportunity is there in Carolina, you got to take advantage of it, and you need to be the top guy. So for the Panthers, I know Dave Canales has come out and said he's going to have to earn it. I didn't really hear his comments from rookie minicamp. Nothing is happening there of any importance at all. All those guys did this past weekend was get familiar with the facility and with the speed of practice in the NFL. That's it. Highlights, lowlights, there's none of those happen during minicamp. So he's going to praise all those guys, which is all well and good. That's who Dave is. It doesn't mean a damn thing. What's going to matter is once they actually get out there and are starting to compete for jobs in like the middle of August. So we're a long way from things mattering that are happening on that practice field that we can take real stock of. And when it comes down to actually competing, Tet McMillan needs to win that job. He needs to solidify himself as the top wide receiver in this room for Carolina and to live up to that hype. So I think he has a talent clearly he's the most talented of all the receivers that they have in that room. You may disagree. That's totally fine. But my expectations for him are the top 10 expectations that were also placed there on guys last year who came out and immediately produced. So that should be happening here as well in Carolina for Tetairoa McMillan, of course, provided that he stays healthy throughout the entirety of the season, which I don't think is going to be an issue. Knock on wood. Mitchell Evans, found it very interesting when Tyler talked about he thinks he can be a starting tight end, and I like how he fits in this room where Tommy, clearly a blocking tight end, good player for them. He can catch the ball every once in a while, but that's not what you're mainly asking him to do. Mitchell Evans comes in as probably the most complete of the tight ends that they have because he has been a blocker. He was behind Michael Mayer there at Notre Dame for a couple of years, and then he exploded on the scene and became their top receiver in 2023 before going down with the ACL. Then last year, when getting back in it, he ended up being one of their top receivers yet again and helping them get to the national championship. So you have questions about JT Sanders as a blocker coming into things last year. He's still developing there, but you already have a player in Mitchell Evans who showed in college that he can block and he can receive the ball. That's not Tommy. That's probably not JT right now. So I'm very curious to see how he's going to step into this room. He may not be the best athlete, but we did talk there too with Tyler about once you have that year removed from the ACL tear, that's when you get back to who you were before. So I think the Panthers should be getting a really good version of Mitchell Evans this upcoming season. So that's the guy I'm interested in to see what he's able to do. And I'm excited about that pick. And we'll see how it plays out. But having Mitchell Evans, JT Sanders, Tommy Trimble together, that's a really solid room, I think, moving forward potentially for Carolina, especially compared to what that room has looked like over the last couple of years once Greg Olsen had departed for Seattle and then, of course, eventually retired. So liking what both those guys, Tet McMillan and Mitchell Evans, can provide here in Carolina this season and beyond. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe and follow the show for free over on YouTube, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, where I'm back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions here this week. Either at me or DM me on Twitter or at me on Blue Sky to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And coming up on tomorrow's show, we'll talk about the expectations for the Panthers 2025 draft class.